panel için Sayın Kemal Madenoğlu, Başbakanlık Devlet Planlama Teşkilatı Müsteşarı, efendim kendilerine oturum başkanı olmak üzere kürsüye arz ediyorum. Mr. Alan O'Donoghue, İrlanda Menkul Kıymetler Borsası Strateji ve İletişim Direktörü, Arnaud de Bresson, Per Europlace Yönetici Direktör Fransa, ve Seth Thomas, Citigroup İngiltere Özel Grup Direktörü. Kendileri burada olacaklar.
Değerli katılımcılar, değerli konuşmacılar, hepinize hoş geldiniz diyorum. Finans merkezleri, deneyimler ve aşılması gereken zorluklar konulu oturuma hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Bu panelde öncelikle finans merkezleri konusunda ülke tecrübelerini irdeleyeceğiz. Bunun öncesinde bu zirveyi düzenleyen P Global başta olmak üzere organizasyonda emeği geçen, katkı veren herkese burada tekrar teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Ve ayrıca bizi dinlemeye gelen tüm katılımcılara da tekrar hoş geldiniz demek istiyorum. Bildiğiniz gibi tabii burada biliyorsunuz İstanbul Finans Merkezi konusunda yeni bir girişim başlattık. Türkiye'de bu toplantının yapılıyor olma ayrıcalığını da kullanarak müsaade ederseniz bu konuya ilişkin birkaç şey söylemek istiyorum. Bildiğiniz gibi İstanbul'umuz doğal güzellikleriyle, tarihi geçmişiyle, stratejik coğrafi konumuyla dünyanın en gözde şehirlerinden birisi. Tabii bugün düzenlenmekte olan bu zirve ve bu oturum özelinde İstanbul'un tarih boyunca sahip olduğu finans ve ticaret konusundaki tarihi ve son yıllardaki artan performansıyla aslında bu zirve ve bu oturum bu amaçla bize önemli katkılar sağlayacağını bekliyorum. Bildiğiniz gibi Anadolu ve İstanbul, ta Lidyalılardan başlayarak bildiğiniz gibi Kapalı Çarşı gibi önemli bir mekanda İstanbul önemli bir finansal merkez deneyimi de yaşamıştır. Bu açıdan İstanbul'un ciddi bir potansiyele sahip olduğunu düşünüyoruz. Bildiğiniz gibi İstanbul Finans Merkezi ile ilgili geçtiğimiz yıl çıkarılan bir strateji doğrultusunda hükümetin sahipliğiyle bir strateji ve eylem planı hazırlandı. Ve bu amaçla İstanbul'un öncelikle bölgesel bir finans merkezi olması amaçlandı. Bu konuda hemen çalışmalara başlandı. 8 tane çalışma grubu oluşturuldu. Ve bu çalışmalarına başladılar. İlk toplantılarını yaptılar. Yüksek Konseyimiz ilk çalışmalarını yaptı. Ve önemli adımlar atıyoruz bu konuda. Dolayısıyla bu süreçlerin, bu tür toplantıların, bu sürecin hızlandırılması, ilgili taraflarla işbirliğinin oluşturulması açısından önemli görüyoruz. Ayrıca İstanbul'umuzun yapılan son değerlendirmelerde önemli mesafeler kat ettiğini sıralamada biliyoruz. O açıdan bu panelin hem uluslararası düzeydeki finansal merkezlere ilişkin önemli bu tartışma ve konuşma sürecinin katkı sağlayacağını, özellikle de ülkemize önemli katkılar sağlayacağına inanıyorum. Aramızda çok değerli konuşmacılarımız var. Ben öncelikle kendilerini kısaca tanıtmak istiyorum. Solumda Bay Arnaud de Brasson, Paris Europlace yönetici direktörü. Kendisi 93 yılından bu yana Fransız finansal piyasasını teşvik etmek amacıyla kurulan Paris Europlace'in idari müdürü. Aynı zamanda 2003 yılında oluşturulan Europlace Finans Enstitüsü ve 2007 yılında oluşturulan Paris Uluslararası Finansal Hizmetler Kümesi Finans İnovasyon'un genel müdürüdür. İkinci konuğumuz Bay Seth Thomas. Bay Thomas, Citigroup'un kamu sektörü grubunda finansal altyapı, mali sektör etkinliği uzmanlık grubunda yöneticidir. Aynı zamanda İngiltere Hazine Departmanı'nda uluslararası finansal hizmetlerde genel sekreterlik üyeliği yapmıştır. Çeşitli bankacılık görevlerinde ayrı olarak bir danışmanlık şirketinde yöneticilik yapmıştır. Bay Thomas Londra'da Galler Kraliyet Ailesi Uluslararası İlişkiler Yönetim Konseyi'nin yönetim kurulundadır ve kendisi Kraliyet Ailesi Sanat Topluluğu akademik üyesidir. Üçüncü konuşmacımız Bayan Aylen Adonahu. Telaffuz için bayağı uğraştık öncesinde. Kendisine de hoş geldiniz diyoruz. Bayan Donahu, İrlanda Menkul Değerler Borsası'nın strateji, politika ve iletişim direktörü olarak 2008 yılından bu yana görev yapmakta. Ayrıca 9 yıl Clearing House Group'ta ve Başbakanlığın Uluslararası Finans Merkezi Danışmanlık Grubu'nda çalışmıştır. Daha sonra Başbakanlık tarafından Ulusal Ekonomik ve Sosyal Konsey'e atanmıştır. Ayrıca Avrupa Finansal İşler Grubu üyeliğinde bulunmuştur. En son konuşmacımız Türkiye'den Bay Fikret Önder. Siz de hoş geldiniz. Özel bankacılıktan sorumlu genel müdür yardımcısı. Temmuz 2000'de özel bankacılıktan sorumlu genel müdür yardımcılığı görevine atanmıştır. Bu görevinden önce yurt dışında çeşitli bankalarda görev yapmıştır. Bonn Üniversitesi Ekonomi Bölümü mezunudur. Akbank'tan önce Londra'da bir bankada kıdemli portföy müdürü ve özel bankacılıktan sorumlu genel müdür yardımcılığı görevlerinde bulunmuştur. Kendilerine hoş geldiniz diyoruz. Bu oturumda her bir konuşmacımızdan öncelikle bir finans merkezi olmayı sağlayan temel faktörlerin neler olduğu, bunun organizasyonuna ilişkin deneyimlerini, bu süreçlerde finans merkezleri arasında işbirliği ve rekabet hususlarının neler olduğu, neler olabileceği, ayrıca özellikle kriz sonrası döneme ilişkin finans merkezlerinin geçirdiği süreçler, kendi finans merkezleri özelinde değerlendirmeleri olabilir. Ayrıca tabii istirham ederlerse İstanbul Finans Merkezi çalışmalarımıza ilişkin bir takım öneri ve değerlendirmeleri olursa da ayrıca mutlu oluruz. Ben öncelikle sözü Bay de Brasson'a vermek istiyorum. Kendisi bize Paris Europlace genel değerlendirme ama özelde de Paris Europlace hakkında bilgi ve değerlendirmelerde bulunacaklar. Buyurun Bay Brasson. Bu slide sunuş konusunda bir yardımcı olur musunuz arkadaşlar? Bu arada zaman konusunda normal programda 1,5 saatlik bir zaman ayrılmış durumda. Aynı hakkımız geç başlamış olsa da devam ediyor. Dolayısıyla kendileriyle görüştük. 15'er dakika yaklaşık bir konuşma öngörüyoruz. Daha sonra katılımcılarımızdan gelecek sorularla beraber bir zaman ayırmak istiyoruz. Yaklaşık yarım saat. Evet. Do you no problem or do you have any flash? Discuss something? Flash. Vermiş aslında mı? Biz yine başlayalım. Teslim edilmiş ama. Evet. Biz başlayalım. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your invitation to participate to this very interesting forum. It's a great honor and a great pleasure for me as a Chief Executive of Paris Europlus to participate to this edition of the Istanbul Finance Summit and to have the opportunity to debate our experiences and the next challenges for the international financial centers. First, I would like to thank very warmly Kemal Madenoglu, who heads the Istanbul Financial Center Initiative, for his kind invitation to come here to Istanbul. All the French people are dreaming to come to Istanbul once in their life because they know what has been the role and the tradition of your city and your country in the history, and the way Istanbul today is the entry gate, the passage between Europe and Asia. And it's not the first time I'm coming here, and the sunny weather that we have today and the view on the Bosphore just outside this room is very impressive. You have to know also that the business relationships are developing very quickly between France and Turkey, and that our companies, French companies, are very active here, but also that the Turkish companies are expanding business activities in France, and we are very proud of that and very interested by this common business. Somebody knows that today part of the electricity which is consumed in France is coming from your country, because we have now an interconnection between our electricity networks in Europe and Turkey is participating to supplying the electricity of our industrial corporates since a few days. So congratulations for your energy and the success of your economy. This forum takes place in a difficult context, as we have all to deal with the consequences of the international financial crisis and the questions concerning the role and the functioning of the financial system. We are today at a turning point, and as far as the financial markets are concerned, we have to take the lessons of the financial crisis and set up new coherent rules at the international level. I will develop these challenges for financial centers, but let me first say that I am very impressed by the work that has been undertaken by Mr. Menoglu to create a performing international financial center here in Istanbul. I believe this objective is a very legitimate ambition, knowing the history of your city, which has historically been a long-established regional financial centers and stands geographically in this position between Europe and Asia. The dynamism today of the Turkish economy and the new developments of your industry will be key elements in favor of the decision to develop this international financial center. But let's come back to our common experience and to the building blocks of what can build a financial center. My impression is that we certainly could have, and we have many similarities in the way France and Turkey can develop their financial marketplace. because of the importance of the role of the government in the way that we have developed our financial market activities, and I know today that the government is playing a key role here to push a project, and also because of the involvement that we have to organize, and it has been the role of Paris Europlus, of the market players, all the categories of market players in the organization and the development of the financial marketplace. Concerning France, the history is quite simple. Paris didn't have the same tradition than London in terms of financial market activities. The things have started in the beginning in the 80s. The first law on the modernization of the financing of the economy, which has been implemented by the socialist government, Mr. Bérégovoy, at that time, which has created the start of the development of the financial sector, mostly with the creation of a new government securities market, transforming the debt, the public debt management, in an attractive international financial market with the intervention of international investors to be invested in government securities. This has been the first step in the history of the development of our financial marketplace. Second step, beginning of the 90s, development of new instruments, derivatives markets, privatization programs, and the beginning of the development of stock markets, and then a development of the fund management activity with a specific status and independence from the banks, which is quite an important element. This has been the second step. And let's say, to simplify, the third step since beginning of 2000, regulation of the markets with something that has been accelerated with the financial crisis, and trying to organize a good balance between the investors' protection and the efficiency and the competitiveness of the financial markets, which is the most important issue. So if we come back to the building stocks, the building blocks to develop the financial marketplace, first, setting up a financial center requires time, resources, strong motivation, and dedication. As Europlus, we have given a strong importance since the start of our job by putting together corporates, investors, and financial intermediaries with the market authorities to work together and implement a strategy to develop the financial marketplace. Why? Because our conviction was since the beginning that the objective, the ultimate goal of the financial industry is to serve the economy, is to serve its clients, the market users, corporate companies, investors, and that we had to work together to fix our priorities. A financial center can be described today as something as a public utility service, essential for the real economy, and not only for its own development. And the primary function of finance is the provision of funds to end users in order to meet their needs. This simple principle is particularly important in the lessons that we have to take of the recent financial crisis. And the priority is that the market rules must be clearly defined and secured among all market players. This is the way that we have to organize the combination between the regulatory authorities and the different components of the financial marketplace. I will not elaborate on this slide, but the main issue is today to understand the importance to create this dialogue between the market participants and the regulators, and we will come back to that on some lessons of the crisis. So what are today the key factors for competitiveness? Open and internationalized market. This is a question of the participation of international foreign participants to the development of the market. We all have the same issue, how to organize the combination between the development of the financial marketplace for the national economy, and how to organize a regulatory environment attractive for international market participants. Our view is that there is no opposition between the two goals, but we have to organize the good combination and organize, like our friends in London are saying, a friendly regulatory environment and good conditions in terms of cost, fiscal incentives to attract international skills and companies. Regulatory regime with best practices, free flow of information and capital. This is a key issue in the lessons of the crisis. Corporate companies want today to have better transparency and to organize a better liquidity on the markets, and to have more access to the information on the way the markets are functioning. Business-oriented legal, supervisory and tax regime. We have, in our case, implemented a special tax regime for non-residents inspired by the London regime, and what we call the impatriates status, which gives today some facilities for international skills coming to France. Attracting regional and global talents with this regime, and by developing capacities in education and research, identify and strengthen competitive advantages, and finally develop a promotion of the financial centers. Finally, concerning the organization of the marketplace, key issue is to organize the best combination between the body in charge to develop the financial center and the regulatory authorities on one side and the market participants on the other side. We, as Europlus, we are putting together the different type of market players to work together, and we have developed 4 main priorities in the recent period. First, consolidate strategy and structural competitive conditions. We have set up 12 working groups in the period of the crisis to take the lessons of the crisis and make new proposals to the government to reorientate and consolidate the position of the Paris Financial Center in the international competition. And we have now the good complementarity between our professional organization and the implementation on the level of the government of what we call the high-level marketplace committee, chaired by the Minister of Finance, Mrs. Christine Lagarde, who takes our proposals and implement under the form of reforms. Second, innovation and research. We are putting a big focus on developing of education and research capacities in our universities and high schools, because we believe this is a key condition for participating to the financial system of tomorrow. You know that many French people are working in the trading rooms all around the world because of these capacities. We have created what we call a financial cluster to put together the market participants and the academics to develop research on topics of interest for the market players and elaborate the new innovative instruments and policies for the future. Third, develop entrepreneurial innovation. It means accompany the development of new SMEs in the financial sector, which is very creative in terms of development of new small and mid-sized companies, but also for the development of SMEs in the industrial sector and with the industrial clusters. And finally, communication and promotion. Just a few comments now on what are our next challenges in terms of international crisis and the post-crisis period. In our view, the Paris Financial Center has been in many aspects more resilient than some international financial centers for almost three reasons. First, an efficient regulation with a good balance between investors' protection and market efficiency. And we have also organized a very strong dialogue between regulators and market professionals. Since the first day of the financial crisis, we have put all around the table the market regulators and the market professionals to make the diagnosis of the crisis and propose new actions to take the lessons and develop new initiatives in terms of regulations and market developments. And it has been possibly one of the reasons for which we have passed more quickly than some others. Second, we believe that let's say the universal banking model has been more resilient in the financial crisis than the specific investment banks, mainly in the US market, because of the diversification of the risks and the potential opportunities in the different activities. We will see what the future will organize on this question, but it has been a factor of better resilience of the French banks and less depreciations for them than the big US investment banks. And third, deep and liquid capital markets, fund management pool with very strong developments in debt and equity instruments, which is today the fuel of the development of the activity of the financial marketplace. Knowing that, we have defined new priorities, and I just mentioned them because I think that the time is running, for the future. First, improving liquidity and security in the financial instruments with more cooperation in the field of regulation. This subject concerns mainly the OTC derivatives, which are a very strong activity on our marketplace and on which we have to create and to organize more transparency today and more adaptation, better adaptation of the instruments to the needs of the market users. Second, developing corporate bond markets. The decrease of the position of the international banks in the credit and the financing of the economy gives opportunities to corporates and also to the investors to have direct access to the markets. And we are strongly in the phases of developing the interest rate markets, the euro interest rate markets in Paris, and mainly with today the development of the corporate bond sector. I think that it could be an interesting subject on which we could discuss here in Istanbul, because I know that your companies could be interested. Third, developing long-term savings. This is a key issue for us. We want to focus more on long-term savings, not only for the needs of the customers, aging population, but also because it is a condition to accompany the development of the financing and the participation of the French corporates on the international markets, participation to big projects in terms of infrastructure, and because long-term savings is a condition for the stability of the financial marketplace. Developing SMEs financing, and finally, And finally, and I will conclude in 2 minutes, finally focusing on new segments which are promising for the future, socially responsible investment and environmental finance. We are very active in the carbon trading. Islamic finance, certainly we could talk here about this subject, and new developments in new activities, project financing in the emerging countries. I will not elaborate on the next priorities for the G20 meeting, but we would be more than interesting to discuss as a representative of European market users, and we have many common works also with the city on this subject, to see how to push the better balance in the way the regulation and the prudential standards for financial markets must be improved to take care on the difficulties that we have known, but with the good balance with the market and the economy efficiency. We have 3 or 4 main priorities in terms of prudential standards, accounting standards, possibly we will talk in the question, risk management, and finally development of new markets in terms of commodities and agricultural markets. Just to conclude, let me underline that in this context, Paris Europlus is developing new cooperations with international financial markets and mostly emerging markets. We have signed a memorandum of agreements since 3 years with GCC countries, Dubai and Qatar, with Russia. We are in the project to finalize an agreement in China with Shanghai, where we will be next December. We would be more than interested to develop more cooperation and dialogue with Istanbul, because we think that your country will be a very important player in the future of the world economy, and that certainly on many aspects we could share our experience and participate to the development of this wonderful project of Istanbul as an international financial center. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Biz teşekkür ediyoruz Bay de Brasson. Kendilerinin öncelikle Paris deneyiminin Türkiye'nin başlangıcıyla benzerlik göstermesi hususuna ben burada kısaca değinmek istiyorum. Elbette bizim başlangıç noktamızda kamunun önemli bir rol alması, başlangıç yapması açısından biz de önemli görüyoruz, ama bundan sonraki süreçte tabii diğer ülke deneyimleri de dikkate alınarak bizim bundan sonraki süreçte bu alanda finansman konusundaki aktörlerin, iş piyasasının, özel sektörün ve bunların oluşturduğu sivil toplum örgütlerinin bu süreçte daha öncü olmalarını açıkçası bekliyoruz. Bundan sonraki sürece ilişkin tasarımımızda biz özel sektörün katılımını ve öncülüğünü önemli görüyoruz. Onu burada belki başlangıç açısından bizim rolümüz önemli, ama bundan sonraki süreçte açıkçası biz de özel sektörün önemini çok önemli görüyoruz. Ben şu aşamada kendisinin söylediklerini özetlemek istemiyorum. Bence gayet net bir şekilde ifade ettiler. Kendilerine çok teşekkür ediyoruz. İkinci sözü Bay Thomas'a veriyorum. O da bizlere özellikle Londra deneyimi ve sanıyorum insan kaynakları ve beceri ağırlıklı bir sunuş yapacaklar. Buyurun Bay Thomas.
Okay, I thought I'd, give your chances for your heads to sort of move from there to over here and get a bit of exercise. I've sat in many conferences in the past. I understand they can go on quite a while, so I'll try and be as lively and entertaining as possible. Good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be back here in Istanbul. I'd like to note, of course, my thanks to the Prime Ministry State Planning Organisation for inviting me to speak. I've spoken to them before as a group, but it's great to have a wider audience here. My colleague from Paris, he referred to the great sunshine which about an hour ago I was experiencing on the roof of the university here. And being a typical British guy, I, of course, stood in the sun for a whole hour, no sun cream on, and now I'm just starting to feel my cheeks and my forehead starting to redden with a slight sunburn. So it's par for the course there. I work at Citibank in London, and last year I was on the secretariat of the UK government's review of its international financial services capability. And this review went on for about 10 months. It was quite an interesting review to be part of, because it started in mid-2008 and it finished in May 2009, which meant that we took in the whole crisis around in autumn 2008, which really kicked off with the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September that year. Tremendously interesting time. The Finance Minister of the UK, the Chancellor, Alistair Darling, as he was, chaired this review, and it was composed of many of the most prominent people in finance in the City of London. Now, I mentioned Lehman's, and as Noah mentioned, we've been through quite a lot in the past few years, particularly in the developed financial centres. And I'm looking at my fellow panellists from Paris and from Dublin. I know that they will have seen at first hand the full impact of the financial crisis on their centres, for better or for worse. But, time marches onwards. And I see Istanbul and Turkey more generally reaching quite an important point in its history. Now, I want to set aside some of the political questions here, some of the political questions that have been going on for about 30 years now. The question of Turkey, or more, Turkey as a member of the European Union. And that's an aspiration, I think, which seems pretty clear to me, is fully supported by the new British government. In fact, David Cameron, our Prime Minister, I believe, was here in May or early June. Along with China, Turkey was one of the first countries that he made an official visit to. So you can see how important the UK takes Turkey. I think, and I've travelled widely in Asia over the past year, speaking to various financial centres and having a dialogue with them, I think that Istanbul could become, along with a handful of other cities, a commercial meeting point between West and East. Now, I know for many of you from Turkey, this will be a bit of a cliche, the kind of the West meets the East. But that's a cliche. It's often have a great element of truth to them. And it's true. You are in an amazing geographic location and cultural location for that meeting point between West and East. And by the East, I mean the extended continent of Asia. I'm not just talking about North Africa or the Middle East here. I'm talking from the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, to the Western Pacific. And other cities who are now in that category as meeting points between West and East, I regard as pretty obvious ones. Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, and oddly enough, given our history and cultural links, London. But while you guys in Istanbul have the potential to become a really important regional hub, you still have a journey to undertake, and you need to be cognizant of the competitive environment. I travel to a lot of financial centres. They all want a piece, if you want an American phrase, they all want a piece of the action. So today I offer, over the next 10 to 15 minutes, some suggestions about things that the city would need to focus on. If you remember one message from my presentation today, let it be this. Context is everything. There is much more to a financial centre, whether it's an international financial centre, a regional one, or a national financial centre. There's much more to it than constructing a set of gleaming office buildings or building a brand new airport. There is even more to a financial centre than having a strong regulatory code or a competitive tax system. All of these things that I've mentioned are critical success factors. But on their own, taken individually, they are not enough to embed a sustainable financial hub. One has to place a financial centre in its wider context, and we've already heard a little bit about that with the issue of Paris. And that context could be geographic, it could be historical, or cultural, or social. Because these are the foundation stones upon which you start to build. Let me give you a couple of examples here. Why has London enjoyed success in financial trade? Why does Singapore today prosper so well? Why has it grown so quickly? Is it, I wonder, partly because trading, physical trade of several decades ago, in the case of London, was a way in life imposed by geography and history? Is it because, and this is a key point here, is it because commerce in both these cities became regarded as one of the main avenues where the ambitious and the talented could prosper regardless of their social background? Now, what am I saying here? It is basically this. You cannot buck the place from where you start. You initially build a financial centre based entirely on your national context, on your national strengths, and you expand later from that basis. There's no point trying to get from A to Z straight away. You've got to go through B, C, and D first. Because financial centres have one important strength, and it is built on the national strength of every country. Because the most important part of any nation's strength is you. And me, in the case of the UK, it's the people. The skills that the people have, the talent that is nurtured amongst the people, or indeed, as we've talked about with Paris, and certainly in London, that is attracted from elsewhere. The ambition and the creativity that is encouraged. It's about people. Because financial centres only succeed when there is a critical mass of different financial, business, and support service players. And these players are staffed by talented and driven, ambitious people. Everything else, the regulatory and the legal frameworks, the hard infrastructure, the softer intangibles of living in any city or financial centre and working there, is about relying on these players and their staff to operate efficiently. So ensuring that you have a pool of talented individuals to work in these centres and that you give them the environment, you enable them to have the environment to work effectively is absolutely at the heart of what you have to do here in Istanbul. And we've got two examples of this idea sitting on the panel already. Well, actually three examples. Because my colleague from Akbank, because Citi has a shareholding in Akbank, a significant shareholding, and my partner from Akbank worked in London before he picked up skills there and then came back to Istanbul. Those skills were being transferred. Citi in Dublin. We have a representative here from Dublin. Citi, 20 years ago, 15 years ago in Dublin, had an office of about 20 to 30 people. It was a small kind of, national business sort of office. Now we have a regional hub based in Dublin, and I think it employs something of the order of 1,200 high-value workers. And that's been grown up over the last 10 years. And why have we chosen Dublin, for example? Because we know in Dublin there is a lot of human capital. There's a deep pool of talent in Dublin at a lower cost, which we wanted as an institution to tap. And Paris. There is cooperation going on between Paris Europlus and the City UK, the two different promotional bodies for those cities. But it's really interesting about the French and finance, particularly trading complex products. It must be something about the French educational system that does it. But France produces some really good mathematicians who are perfect for trading in financial markets. And so I think after Paris, London must house the second highest concentration of French mathematicians anywhere in the world, trading on the markets in London. It's a very international city. We attract the talent and we try and keep it there. Now, I've talked about context and I've talked about people, and I could stop my presentation there, but I won't. I'm sorry about that. Of course, I've got slides to go through, 2 more slides. Because Istanbul needs to consider how to provide the operational environment which these people, this talent, needs to prosper. Okay, slightly busy slide, but you all get copies of this later, I'm sure. Now, the factors I've listed in this slide, I would consider first-order success factors. Of course, if Istanbul has aspirations to specialise in certain industries, such as, say, reinsurance or commodities trading, then you'll need to look to second-order or specialist factors. But let's stick with the sort of big picture stuff first. I've divided the chart into quadrants using 4 categorizations. Firstly, general factors. Now, general factors are factors which are applicable to most international business centres. An example might be Bangalore in India regarding IT. Another general factor would be a government which actively supports economic development opportunities, and we see this with Turkey today and financial services. Secondly, financial services specific factors, those which are unique to the industry or particularly valued by the financial sector. One such factor which we've already talked about is independent and forward-looking regulation. Thirdly, hard factors. What a government or private sector can put in place or seek to attract. For example, you can build good roads, you can build a nice new airport, or you can enable a predictable and practical legal system. And finally, softer factors. The intangibles, if you like. Here, it is a mix of policy measures, but also contextual measures. An example of a softer factor would be for an international centre having a mind open to foreigners or having an attractive city for expats to live in is absolutely vital. Now, policymakers often overlook these softer factors. Maybe it's because they're really very difficult to establish in the first place, and you can't pull levers to make them work. But many of these factors, you see, they revolve around the attitudes, culture, and people themselves. And I would suggest to you that being successful on the softer side of these critical success factors, the harder factors to be actually successful at, is really important, because this translates into relatively sustainable competitive advantage. One of the things during our report on London which kept coming back to us was how great London was to live in as an expat. Obviously not the weather, as I talked about, you get much better sunshine in Turkey and Istanbul. But London has a huge cultural breadth. It has an immense number of different nationalities living there and forming social sets together. So if you're from any country in the world, you can go and live in London and there will be friends and people from your own country there that you can socialise with if you so want. It's just an exciting city to live in, and that makes London quite a sustainable place, really, for international financial services, because people from overseas want to go there and to work there and to experience London. And I'm sure when you're looking at this diagram, you've worked it out already, but for Istanbul, when you take into account all these factors, it's important for you eventually to make the journey from the top left-hand box all the way down to the bottom right-hand box. That's the route, if you like, the route map which you have to take. One of the lessons of the London report, again, was while London was very strong on certain factors, there were other factors, critical success factors, that we were weak or we needed to improve on. But the key point was that across the whole range of critical success factors that you see here, London had a good showing. We were competitive on most factors, and that's really important. And because when you take all the factors together, which I mentioned on the last slide, you provide a really competitive environment for people to prosper within. So, critical success factors are really important in building a financial centre. You have to understand where you start from. You understand your context. You know where you want to get to. You have ambitions to become a regional hub. So therefore, you have to decide your strategy to get there, and you have to execute it well. And then maybe you get a good ranking in the Financial Centres Index. But it shouldn't be the only thing you're aiming for. Now, final slide. You asked me to make a quick assessment of Istanbul. Now, this is my assessment from Istanbul as an outsider, as an international business person who travels and has dialogues with a number of different financial centres around the world. So I'm trying to be objective here. I've read your strategic plan, and I've read a lot of other information about and documents on Istanbul and how it stacks up and compares against some of the other regional and European and Asian centres. And given that Citibank has quite an important office here, I have also that insider's perspective. And indeed, there's a Citibank stand just outside the auditorium here. Now, I think to summarise this slide, I want to concentrate on 4 factors. I think there are 4 key development areas, as I understand it, for Istanbul. And the first thing is this: taxes. You need stable taxes. You know, there are 3 things that dissuade new international entrants to a financial market. High political risk is one thing. Difficult regulatory and legal environment is another thing. An unstable tax system, whether it's corporate or personal, is the third thing. Secondly, the legal environment. It's not just about having good laws that go through Parliament. It is equally about the application of those laws and the enforceability of the law. Ask some companies about how long it takes a judgment to proceed through the court system and compare it to your competitors. Ask an international company about how easily contracts can actually be enforced in practice. There are some big economies around the world where that's big developing economies where that's a very big issue for international companies, the enforcement of the law. The third thing is markets. We've already talked about that in relation to Paris. Markets, you need depth. You need depth in terms of the numbers of companies listed on an exchange, but also you need breadth in terms of the nationality and type of companies listed on the exchange. There's no point having an exchange comprised solely of real estate and banking companies, which suck up all the available capital. You need the breadth of the whole industrial sector. And you need a range of different investor types to invest in them. Additionally, you need other professions. You need lawyers, you need actuaries for the insurance sector, you need accountants, you need PR people to be able to publicise some of the companies on the stock exchange and get them good publicity. All these things service the financial centre. It's not just about asset managers, banks and insurance companies, it's about the professional industries as well that surround them. And finally, going back to people again, skills. Now, I know that Turkey's graduate population, and we're here in a really great-looking university, I have to say, Turkey's graduate population is quickly growing. But in finance, ultimately, it is the level of specialist skills that count. And in an international context, having people who can work through the medium of English is absolutely crucial. It may seem unfair to many countries that English has become the dominant international language. Obviously, I don't mind being from Britain. But it may seem unfair, but that's the reality of the situation. Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong and India all have a tremendous advantage in Asia, in Asian financial markets because of this, because they speak English as a first or a second language widely. As I said before, for skills, it all comes back to people from the financial centre. So, to conclude, there is a tremendous opportunity here for growth here in Istanbul for financial services, for you to grow as a regional hub. But the development points I've noted here really stand out for me. And I'm sure that this is now going to be part of the discussion following this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bay Thomas'a çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Gerçekten Çok faydalı, özellikle İstanbul özelinde yaptığı değerlendirmelere çok teşekkür ediyorum. Çok faydalı bulduk. Şimdi sözü Bayan Aileen O'Donoghu'ya vermek istiyorum. İrlanda deneyimi üzerine. Buyurun Bayan O'Donoghue.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this conference. This is my second time in Istanbul. The first time I was here was in 2005 at the Champions League final, where Liverpool staged a remarkable comeback against Milan, and I'm hoping that the global financial sector performs the same kind of miracle over the next number of months and years. Maybe just to tell you a little bit about myself, first of all. As the chairman mentioned, I'm Director of Strategy in the Irish Stock Exchange. Prior to that, I was the lead private sector representative for the financial services sector in Ireland. And my job was to work with the department of the Prime Minister, the Department of Taoiseach, similar to your department. And the objective of which was to be very clear about what it was that Ireland wanted to achieve in the financial services space, and to develop the sector along those lines. Now, just to give you a bit of a picture as to what Dublin is, Dublin as a financial centre, an international centre, was nothing in 1987. It was very much, as Seth alluded to, a domestically focused financial centre. It has gone in less than 25 years from that to, according to the GFCI index, 8th in Europe. And we're listed as one of 3 globally, sort of broadly based financial centres alongside Amsterdam and Paris. And the areas that Dublin has specialised in, as you'd expect, are quite broad: banking, insurance, reinsurance, funds and asset management, international securities, which the Irish Exchange has been very active in promoting, corporate treasury, leasing, payments and money transmission, and technology and service provision. The result of that, I guess, is that we have about 500 international firms now in Dublin, 6,000 domestic, and the average salary in the sector will be around €60,000. So that gives you an idea of the scale of development from effectively nothing to that in less than 25 years. How did we do it? And I find that it's fascinating to hear where Istanbul is in relation to its development as an international financial services centre, because, to be honest, it's not rocket science. It's very clear how you do this. It's much more difficult to deliver it, but it's very clear what the roadmap needs to be. And the first thing that needs to be done is there needs to be absolute clarity amongst government, across the political class and the business establishment, what it is they want. And Seth is absolutely right. There is no point having a grand ambition unless it's based on actual facts and reality. So looking at the core strengths of the jurisdiction and trying to develop a niche initially that is attractive to international institutions to come and do business in a jurisdiction. And that's exactly what we did in Dublin. Initially, I mean, clearly there are very important factors like tax and education and regulation and so on, but you just need to capture the imagination and make a proposition that is compelling, that is not being delivered by any other financial centre. And I think that there are plenty of niches still untapped out there. So the first thing is to have a clear framework, to have a clear government-backed strategy. The second thing is to make sure that there is a structure, a support structure that is capable of delivering on that strategy. And we in Dublin developed that very early on, back in 1987. We, under the auspices of the Department of the Prime Minister, established a clearinghouse group which identified all the various government policy areas that needed to be put into place to make this International Financial Services Centre a reality. That clearinghouse group is still in place today. So it is to be clear about what you want to achieve, be realistic about what can be achieved and do it. I think that the areas that we have been very focused on from a policy development point of view, well, they're pretty clear. First of all, having the right regulatory and legislative environment. Now, clearly, the regulatory environment is emerging all of the time. And as a member of the European Union, we are absolutely bought into and governed by the rules that apply throughout the European Union. And in fact, that assisted a jurisdiction which is very small. The population of Ireland is 4.5 million. It was very important for us to sell to the international community the position as a member of the European Union, which is governed by the same rules as the rest of the members of the European Union, and we were able to participate in the single market. And that was an incredibly powerful tool for a small jurisdiction which doesn't have a particularly large domestic market. And I think that we're all going to see significant regulatory developments over the next number of years. And I think that there is going to be a greater emphasis on harmonisation and cooperation between regulators. And I think the opportunity for regulatory arbitrage is over. So if jurisdictions are looking for some kind of competitive advantage in that space, I think that's unlikely. What's more important is that regulation is confident, it is professional, and that those working in the regulatory authorities are expert. The second area is in relation to the fiscal or tax environment. Clearly, Ireland had a very clear corporate tax position which applies across the economy, which is a 12.5% corporation tax rate that applied to financial services, to manufacturing and whatever. So that was, without doubt, that was a very attractive and remains a very attractive piece. However, I think what is underestimated is the importance of having, and particularly now, given the emphasis of the US on tax cooperation, it is very important that jurisdictions do have clear links and a good tax treaty network so that they can make it clear that they are part of the international tax community and that there is transparency in tax matters. The third area is in relation to expertise, and Seth mentioned it on a number of occasions, and he's absolutely right. People matter. We have and had at the time a very young population in Ireland, and certainly at the time when we started the International Financial Services Centre in Dublin, it was very cost competitive, so you could get good quality graduates at a comparatively reasonable rate. And certainly in comparison to some of the other major centres. Now that has changed a little bit over the years, but we're still pretty cost competitive. I think that Istanbul in particular has a tremendous opportunity, given the proportion of graduates in this economy, to capitalise on something that seems quite soft, but actually is a major sell for international institutions locating in various jurisdictions. The other thing to say, of course, from an expertise point of view is, and I know that Arno mentioned it too, the importance of making sure that your jurisdiction is an attractive place to live from a taxation point of view and from a quality of life point of view. And that does matter significantly. The third piece that was important for Dublin in relation to the development of the international financial sector was the ability for us to attract Irish graduates that had gone overseas in previous years and periods of less economic activity, and attract them back. And many of them had gone to London, had worked in London, the London Financial Centre, had an awful lot of expertise, and we were able to bring them back to sell an ambition to them of what we wanted Dublin to become, and they found that attractive from a quality of life point of view. So it is sometimes the soft things that do make a difference. It is also important to have, and this is the fourth area that I want to focus on, that the infrastructure that is available to develop skills and education is absolutely bought into the concept that you're trying to develop as a financial sector. In other words, it is important that the universities and the education and state agencies, training agencies, are absolutely committed to developing and delivering a pipeline of graduates, both from a generalist business development point of view and also from an expertise point of view. International corporates want to know what's available and what the plans are to keep it coming. And if there is clarity around the support that the education infrastructure is prepared to give to the sector, then that makes a major difference. Finally, in relation to how we did it, I suppose this is something that's become more active of late, the focus on product development, research and development, and innovation. And being very clear about, it is not static. What you're selling today as a financial centre is not going to be what you're going to be selling in 5 years' time. You must move along the value chain. And therefore, there needs to be a strategy around selling what it is you have to offer, but also being clear about where you want to be in 5 years' time, and ensuring that you have the necessary innovation and product development support structures, including, again, the universities, to support that transition. So overall, they're the kinds of areas that we have focused on in our development strategy in Dublin. And underlying all of that, there are 4 sort of conditions: cost, infrastructure, government support, and policy consistency. So there's very clear steps that can be taken, but there has to be a background of absolute stability and clarity around cost, infrastructure, government support, and policy consistency. From our point of view, what's next? Well, again, I think we can safely say that the competitiveness between financial centres is quite aggressive, and I would agree with Arnaud that it is important that centres do get their message out there, and promotion is essential. For example, recently we have had the appointment of the former Irish Prime Minister John Bruton, who is also the former EU Ambassador to the United States, appointed as the chair of IFS' Ireland, and his job will be to go and speak to people at a senior level in other jurisdictions about what Ireland has to offer as a financial centre. We're also moving into the space of the green IFSC, into areas like intellectual property, Islamic finance, and also specifically further work on skill development. So just to reiterate, from Istanbul's perspective and from Dublin's perspective, from Paris and London, this is not a static picture. We can see from the Global Financial Centres Index that centres move up and down. Traditional centres shouldn't be complacent. Emerging centres should be ambitious. And the GFCI has specifically identified 4 areas which I think are critical for any financial centre that wants to be credible to attend to: business environment, people, infrastructure, and market access. This doesn't happen by accident. It is important that people decide their ambition based on facts, be clear about what needs to be done and by whom, by the private sector, by the public sector, communicate that, and then execute it. And by and large, from what we've, I think, heard in this session, all centres that are established and that are attempting to be established are largely following the same sort of approach and strategy, which I think means that it probably is the right way to go. Thank you.
Bayan Danava'ya çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Ben son sözü Sayın Fikret Önder'e vermek istiyorum. Buyurun Fikret Bey.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be discussing this subject here as somebody who has spent more or less 20 years of his life working in international financial centers, although not only in London. And there is nothing more I would like to see than Istanbul becoming at least a regional financial center. We are not quite there yet, but there certainly is hope. And I would like to tell you why, and probably what brings this hope is really the strength of the Turkish banking sector. As we know, Istanbul has been an important financial sector, important trade and cultural center in its long history, supported by an unique geographic location. The fact that Turkish economy and banking sector have both emerged even stronger from the recent global recession bolstered the city's standing as a strong candidate to transform to a regional financial center. Three key factors have contributed to differentiating Turkey during the global recession. A robust banking system, strong budget figures and fiscal discipline, and a low-leveraged yet growth-oriented economy. The Turkish financial system, fiscal outcomes, and the vibrant local real economy all show signs of promise. Turkey has a strong investment thesis and is ready to move into a higher gear for an improved economic position. Turkey has already established itself as a strong economy. It is the 8th largest economy in Europe and ranks 17th globally in terms of total GDP. Sectors such as finance, energy, construction, and automotives carry high growth potential in the medium term. The construction sector in particular has the potential to benefit from underdeveloped neighboring regions, and despite the recent surge in financial services, financial products are still underpenetrated. In terms of the automotive sector, Turkey has become a production hub, especially for the European market. A robust Turkish banking sector, reinforced by effective regulatory and supervisory framework, has increased Turkey's resistance to the recent crisis. In comparison to many economies, the Turkish banking sector has remained resilient through the current crisis and has weathered fluctuations well. This was accomplished thanks to a robust capital structure, reliance on core banking activities, a healthy loan portfolio, and a low leverage structure. Several factors have contributed to this achievement. The recent crisis has emphasized the importance of a strong capital structure. Global banks have been seeking to improve their capital base and leverage their balance sheets. In this respect, the sound capital base of Turkish banking has acted as a significant advantage. And Turkey has been one of the really few countries which didn't have to seek government assistance. Capital adequacy ratio of the Turkish banking sector is currently around 19. This is higher than the target ratio of 12% and the legal limit at 8%. This robust capital base has also acted as a buffer to absorb shocks. The penetration of off-balance sheet items and derivative products has always been low in the Turkish banking sector. Banking was pursued through the traditional channel and with a focus on core banking activities. Credit growth has been strong in the years following the 2001 crisis, when Turkey experienced an average annual GDP growth of 7%. However, it did not reach excessive levels. Average real credit growth was around 30%, whereas the level reached up to 40 to 50% in many of the other emerging markets, emerging countries. The relatively cautious expansion in the credit book helped keep the loan portfolio healthy. Although the non-performing loan ratio rose, it was still only 5.4% in November 2009. This marked an increase of only 2 percentage points since the start of the crisis. The NLP ratio is currently 4.2. Finally, on the back of robust risk management, leverage remained low in the sector. The ratio of assets to shareholders' equity remains around 8, well below the international average of 30 to 40. And the 30 to 40 includes even such famed big Swiss banks, for example. The sector sustained its profitability even through the crisis and at no point required a line of support from the government. Its strength will continue to support the economy through its path to recovery. Resilience of the banking sector supports Turkey on the way to receiving investment grade. The banking sector's resilience has supported rating upgrades. Since December 2009, Fitch, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's have positively revised Turkey's ratings. Turkey is now rated 2 notches below investment grade by Moody's and S&P, and just 1 notch below by Fitch. However, when you have a look at the credit default spreads, for example, the markets have already placed Turkey at a higher position than not only Greece and Portugal, but even countries like Italy. The spreads are lower than all these countries. Credit upgrades are now especially important, given that many European nations are experiencing sharp downgrades. Turkey is anticipated to reach investment grade in the next few years. Despite those strengths of Turkey, there still exists areas for improvement. Mr. Thomas has mentioned a lot of the relative factors about qualified labor force, about the importance of it. It's certainly among the key factors to become a financial center. Turkey's demographic advantage with a young, dynamic, and large population stands out in this respect. Compared to the aging societies of the West, Turkey has a very young population with an average age of 29. The educational level of the labor force is also constantly improving. A considerable portion of this labor force, around 200,000 people, are currently employed in the financial services sector. However, to fully utilize this advantage, Turkey should continue to invest rigorously in its human capital. An increasingly skilled labor force will also ensure increased innovation, higher technology, and increased value-added production. A few words to the low cost of doing business in Turkey. Especially relatively lower labor costs also acts as a support for Istanbul. The reduction of the corporate tax rate from 30 to 20%, which was back in 2006, was a step to enhance Turkey's international competitiveness in this respect. Istanbul's international cost competitiveness can be supported further through reducing financial transaction costs. Financial debt is another point that has been discussed. Certainly there is significant way to go for Istanbul. Turkey also advanced in its legal and supervisory framework in recent years, which is a significant requirement for a financial center. The supervision of the financial sector has been rigorous under the bank's regulatory and supervisory authority, which is one of the major reasons why the Turkish financial sector has sustained its resilience in face of the global recession. In capital markets area, Turkey has lost valuable years after choosing and dogmatically implementing a 1933 style or 1933 Glass-Steagall Act style model, differentiating between deposit and investment banks. The Capital Markets Board's recent reforms and regulations, which allow banks to be active in many new investment products, give us a new chance to develop financial markets and maybe catch up lost time. Still, there are many gray areas in capital markets regulations which need to be cleared or even eliminated. The last major requirement for a financial center is adequate infrastructure to handle increasing transactions and traffic in the city. In this respect, Istanbul certainly needs some further investments. The current global financial crisis has induced a paradigm shift, moving balance of power from the west to the east. Emerging markets has begun to play greater role in the global economic structure. Turkey prevailed even stronger from the recent global economic volatility. Istanbul has a historic chance to leverage strong economy, robust financial sector, and growth potential of the country. I firmly believe that Istanbul, with its dynamic life, historical and cultural diversity, will fully benefit from its advantages to connect the Asian markets with European and American peers to close the circuit. Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz Fikret Bey. Evet, konuşmacılarımızın sunumları tamamlandı. Sanıyorum bir 15-20 dakikamız daha var. Gerçi yemek vakti geçiyor. Ben sizi daha fazla bekletmek istemiyorum. Katılımcılarımızdan, dinleyicilerimizden sorusu olan ya da bir değerlendirmesi olan varsa alabiliriz. Buyurun. Mikrofon geliyor bir saniye.
This is for Monsieur de Bresson, but other speakers perhaps also could interject. Is this a zero-sum game, being a financial center? Can there be cooperation? Do they have common faith, common future? Do they go up together? Do they go down together? These are my questions.
Teşekkür ederiz. Evet, Bay Bresson'la başlayabiliriz. Diğer konuşmacılarımız da cevap verebilirler ayrıca. Buyurun Bay Bresson.
Thank you very much for this very simple question. My conviction is that Mr. Madenoglu used the term of competition and cooperation. I think it's the key issue. The two aspects are joint. Cooperation first. In Europe, we had today an expression of London, Dublin, Paris, but we could have heard also Frankfurt. In fact, if you allow me, when we have created our organization 15 years ago, it was a little bit before the creation of the euro, of the single currency. Some observers were thinking that in 5 years of time it would be only one financial center in Europe, which should be London. And since that time, we were convinced that the European financial marketplace, because it's today the key objective, the key issue, used to have several financial centers working by interconnection with different specificities. And we are convinced that we must work even in Europe with between London, Frankfurt, Paris, Dublin, Stockholm, and we have to develop some specificities and work on the cooperation field. and our objective is to work together to build a global European efficient marketplace. It's the reason for which we have created this joint committee with London to exchange our views, knowing that, like it has been said, our organizations represent the market users, and the market users have the same interest in different locations, and they can work together to build an efficient and competitive financial marketplace. In the same time, competition is good for everybody. We were talking before this session together, and even between Paris and Istanbul, it will be certainly some competition in the future. You are the emerging market. We will try to run, and it will be good for everybody. We have to stimulate each other with competition. We have to compete for innovative instruments in the future to meet the needs of the people in the future, in Asia, in China, and also in Europe and here. And we all have to compete for that and to find better solutions, develop research capacities for that, and innovation which can be useful. And I think this is this coming to last point. All my message concerning our organization is also to explain that in our view we have a common goal between the different type of market players. There is some competition in the financial industry between corporates and banks, which can have opposite interests in terms of selling products, and the corporate have their specific needs. But there is also a common goal to develop the financial marketplace together, because it's the common interest of the market participants to satisfy the needs and to be altogether competitive. So there is, like every time in life, both aspects.
This is a great question. It's the kind of question that has the capacity to cause trouble between members of the panel. And I usually like to cause trouble, but I'm not going to on this occasion. Quick answer to your question is this a zero-sum game? No, it isn't. If you look at economic history, you look at what's going on in developing markets at the moment, you see financial services growth which always exceeds the growth of the mainstream economy. And that's because that's how economies develop. Initially economies need, the industries and companies within them need access to finance. And as those companies grow and employ more people, the people's need for retail financial services, we talked about demographics and pensions earlier, their need for financial services expand. So I would say that this is not a cake which stays the same over time, it grows over time. I would also say that diversity in financial centres is good, because financial centres fulfil different roles. You have national centres which look after the domestic economy, you have regional centres which are more focused on interactions with neighbouring countries, and then you have global financial centres, London or New York or whatever, who work more internationally. And you also have specialist centres. There are jobs in Dublin today, if you don't mind me saying, that maybe 20 years ago would have been housed in London. But Dublin is part of London's value chain now, I think, because just look at City, there are processing jobs, good processing, high-value processing jobs there, and innovation jobs in Dublin as well that we've got there, which used to be in London, in a high-cost centre, but now it's part of our value chain in Dublin, which is lower cost and good skills. It's the same with Paris. I said we have a lot in London of French financiers who are based there, but there are also things in which we cooperate as an international financial centre with Paris on, such as regulation, because we know it's in both our interests to ensure that the wider community, wider society, political community understand that they can think longer term about financial services rather than just react to certain shorter term events. And just to be very naughty at the end and talk about London for a bit, the report we did produce on London last year for the UK government and in cooperation with the UK government, its theme was partnership. There's no point London or New York or Hong Kong or Singapore sitting there and expecting business to automatically come to us. There's no point being complacent and saying we're number one in the Financial Centres Index ranking. Well, if you're like that, you're not going to be number one for very long. The point of being a good partner is that we want to continue, London has continued to work with the world, alongside Paris and Dublin, to help countries which don't have certain capabilities to have those financial capabilities, and London wants to continue that partnership with the world in future.
My answer would be depends on what area of finance. In my area, in private banking, it certainly is a zero-sum game. And you can see that in the struggle between offshore and onshore financial centers. Look at the tremendous pressure put on Switzerland these days by almost all governments of the world, starting from the US, Germany, Italy, Hungary, Turkey. Everybody's trying to make tax amnesties and siphon the wealth back to the home countries. Why? Because there is only a limited wealth worldwide, and everybody wants to have a share of it, and it doesn't grow that fast. So in certain areas, such as private banking, I would say it certainly is a zero-sum game.
Teşekkür ederiz.
I absolutely agree with all the speakers. It's not a zero-sum game. I mean, if you go back to where we started, it is ludicrous in some senses for Dublin to have pretended that it could become a financial centre, since it was right beside two very large financial centres. But there's enough pie, and the pie is getting bigger. And to give you an example of how it is possible to grow in the face of such significant competition, it is about finding a niche. It is about delivering very well within that niche. We're now in a situation in Ireland where we regarded ourselves as a pretty cost competitive, high quality location, but even we found that during the boom years in Ireland that there was a requirement to outsource some activities from Ireland, from Dublin to Belfast. So there is a constant requirement to reinvent, and there's a constant requirement to build partnerships with other financial centres, which assists in the delivery of your own offering, as Seth has said. And I think that's probably also true for Paris as well.
Teşekkür ederiz. Buyurun.
Hello, I just have a very quick question. What is the place of Islamic finance in the European financial centers? I know that Luxembourg is pretending to become a hub of Islamic finance in Europe, but what about Paris, Dublin, London, and Istanbul?
It's quite interesting. This is an area I know a little bit about, and in fact there's going to be a speaker who's head of Citi's Islamic Banking Unit, the CEO, I think later this afternoon. It's a really fascinating area. It is a growth market. My colleague from Paris has already talked about this particular market. 2 years ago, the British government were interested in issuing a sovereign sukuk. And I think it would have been the first Western government to issue a sukuk at that point. After Germany, no. The first Western government after Germany. To issue a sukuk, and I thought that was just fascinating because there is a developing retail Islamic market in the UK, because we do have, due to history, a large Muslim population, obviously Germany as well, and Paris and France. So to give the retail market opportunities to invest in the country they lived via Islamic principles. So I think that this will continue to grow in Western Europe. And I think rightly it should, because finance, as the very first speaker from Paris said, what is the role of finance? It is to serve the industry, it is to serve the people of a country. And if you have a need amongst the people for Islamic products, then industry should serve, then finance should serve that need.
If I may on that, and I would like to make a very direct answer to this question, more especially here in Istanbul. A question of Islamic finance is not an evidence in a country like France, because of the tradition of our country of the separation between the state and the religion. And it is something which is very important in our history and our tradition. Knowing that, because we have understand, and France have understand that Islamic finance is developing in Islamic countries, which are becoming more and more important market players in the world, like Thomas was saying. Second, Islamic instruments can be, in some cases, particularly valuable in terms of taking the lessons of the financial crisis because of their specificities in the way they organize the relationship between savers and financial institutions. Knowing that we have an important Islamic population, we are going ahead, and we have developed a very strong effort since 3-4 years now to adapt our regulatory environment to allow the development of mutual funds, sukuk issuance, and implementation of Islamic banks in France. We are finalizing some legal aspects this year to welcome international sukuks. And there is another point. Our businesses are also interested to participate more to development of the sukuk international market. Could be certainly another aspect to develop cooperation here in Istanbul with the houses which are active on this market. So we are very open and ready to participate, to welcome international players. I think that we should be more than interested to share your experience here, mainly in Turkey, on this aspect, to know how to do and to organize in the better conditions. Yep. So the first step has been, you're completely right, on investment banking activities, which is the activity of the financial marketplace and our job. And we are now in the process to examine the possibilities to develop retail activities. There is a first agreement which have been signed this year between Natixis and the Qatar Islamic Bank to examine possibilities to develop activities in retail banking. And we are convinced that the things should develop in the coming months and years, and also in this area.
Teşekkür ederiz. Başka soru sormak isteyen? Evet, gördüğüm kadarıyla başka sorumuz yok. Ben öncelikle kısaca kendi adıma en azından konuşmacılarımızın bir finans merkezi için gerekli temel unsurlar ve bunları kendi deneyimleri özelinde yaptığı değerlendirmeler için çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Bunlar özellikle düzenleyici çerçeve, uygun iş ortamının sağlanması, insan kaynakları, kamu ile işbirliği, yenilikçilik gibi temel hususlarda kendi deneyimlerini bizlerle paylaştılar. Ayrıca yine bunlarla bağlantılı İstanbul üzerine yapılan değerlendirmeler oldu. Ben şahsen çok faydalı buldum yaptıkları değerlendirmeleri. Eminim sizler de faydalanmışsınızdır. Bu bölümün sonuna geldik. Ben öncelikle konuşmacılarımıza, özellikle 3 konuşmacımıza yurt dışından İstanbul'a gelerek yaptıkları bu güzel katkılar için, yaptıkları konuşmalar için, deneyimlerini bizlerle paylaştıkları için çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Ayrıca ülkemizden de Fikret Bey'in sağ olsunlar değerlendirmeleri, özellikle İstanbul'un bir finans merkezi olarak potansiyelini çok güzel bir şekilde ortaya koyduğu için de ayrıca kendisine teşekkür ediyorum.